The university gala pulsed with polite murmurs. Tom, spotting Walter Peterson, felt the familiar knot tighten. As he moved to speak, Walter turned his back, a sharp, deliberate movement that severed Tom's hopeful words midair. Left standing alone, Tom felt the hushed glances of colleagues, each one a judgment. A security guard then moved, silent and efficient, guiding him towards the periphery. The smell of burnt toast hung heavy in the kitchen air that Tuesday morning. Carol, already by the door, adjusted the collar of a denim jacket that sat too snug across her shoulders. Her sundress, a splash of yellow cotton, hugged her frame, revealing too much leg for a woman her age, or at least for one with a 17-year-old daughter. She wore sneakers, the laces bright white. Sarah, across the breakfast table, stopped chewing her dry cereal. Her eyes, a darker shade of Carol's own blue, rolled upward, a swift, almost imperceptible gesture of adolescent disdain. Tom watched Carol push open the screen door, the sun catching the highlights in her carefully straightened hair. The door shut with a soft click. "Dad, honestly," Sarah began as Tom backed the sedan out of the driveway a few minutes later. Her voice held the practiced weariness of someone who had seen too much. "She acts like she's my sister. Those clothes." She shook her head, a strand of dark hair falling across her face. Tom kept his gaze fixed on the road, watching the familiar brick houses slide by. He didn't offer a defense, nor did he join in the criticism. He understood Sarah's point. It was the same defiance that had first drawn him to Carol decades ago, a stubborn streak that refused to bend to expectations, a refusal that once felt like courage. He remembered her, 20-year-old Carol, a student in his American History survey course. He was a newly minted TA, fresh out of his master's program, still unsure of his own footing. She sat in the third row, her dark hair often falling into her eyes as she took notes, her hand moving across the page with an almost furious concentration. Their glances in the fluorescent-lit classroom, quick and stolen, had been the first whispers of a forbidden thing. After class, her questions lingered, not always about the curriculum. A smile would stretch across her face, a small, knowing curve that challenged the unspoken rules between them. The subtle flirting had built like a summer storm, a slow, inevitable pressure. Then came the day her father, Walter Peterson, a man whose wealth was only matched by his rigid expectations, had coldly dismissed her after she told him about Tom. The scene had been brief, the words few, but the rejection absolute. Carol, her face pale but her jaw set, had driven directly to Tom's cramped apartment. "We're going to the courthouse," she had said, not asking but stating. He remembered the sterile smell of the old county building, the nervous sweat on his palms, the quick exchange of vows before for a judge whose bored gaze suggested he had seen it all 1,000 times before. There were no flowers, no guests, only the quiet understanding that they had made a choice, and it would be theirs alone to live with. Walter Peterson kept his word. The severance was absolute. No wedding gift, no congratulatory call, no financial cushion for Carol's unexpected marriage. For years, Tom had tried. Small letters and phone calls to Walter and Beth, Carol's mother, attempts to mend what felt like a self-inflicted wound on his new wife's part. Each effort was met with silence or a curt dismissal through a secretary. The door remained closed, bolted from the inside. He pulled up to the curb in front of the campus bookstore, a brick building with ivy clinging to its walls. Sarah, already halfway out the door, shouldered her backpack. "I'll get a ride home with Kevin Jensen tonight," she said, her voice casual, already distracted by the thought of her summer job. The name landed in Tom's gut like a small, cold stone. Kevin Jensen, an older law student, charismatic and confident in a way Tom knew Sarah wasn't yet. He felt a familiar ache, a worry he could not quite name but always recognized. Carol had laughed it off, said Sarah was old enough to make her own choices. "You're still young, you need a reliable man," Carol would say, but the words were for another time, another context. Now they just sounded like a casual dismissal of Tom's own quiet unease. Tom drove across campus to his office in the Arts and Humanities building. The thought of Kevin Jensen lingered. Sarah, with her quick laughter and sudden seriousness, felt too open, too guileless. He worried about the ease with which Kevin seemed to have slipped into her orbit. His mind drifted to the lecture he was preparing for his vigilante history elective. The complexities of justice outside the law, the moral dilemmas of men taking matters into their own hands. The quiet hum of the campus, the predictable rhythm of his academic life, usually offered a small comfort, a steady counterpoint to the less ordered landscape of his home life. Today it felt fragile. Later that evening, dinner was a quiet affair, a ballet of forks and knives against ceramic plates. Carol talked about a new art exhibit downtown, her voice light, almost too bright. Tom offered short replies, his eyes scanning the newspaper open beside his plate. An almost imperceptible tension settled between them, a silence that wasn't peaceful but merely the absence of sound. Later, after the dishes were put away, he heard the faint murmur of Sarah's voice from her bedroom, low and conspiratorial, the soft click of her door as she closed it for the night. The calls with Kevin had become a nightly ritual. He felt the growing distance, a quiet erosion of the shared space. In the dark of the living room, Tom felt the familiar Midwestern loneliness settle in, even in his own home. The days folded into weeks with the quiet persistence of turning pages in a textbook. Tom taught his vigilante history elective, guiding students through dusty accounts of frontier justice, the rough edges of law in a land still finding its shape. He spoke of the regulators, of self-appointed lawmen, and the ever-present question, when does private action become public good? He wrestled with the definitions of justice, their shifting meanings across time and circumstance, finding a strange resonance in their complexity. Carol's schedule, however, showed no such predictable rhythm. She was often late coming home, her explanations vague, always tied to the paper. Early morning meetings bled into late-night edits, or so she said. Tom would be grading papers in his study, the lamp casting a circle of light on his desk, when he'd hear her key in the lock, the soft click as she slipped it inside. Sometimes after midnight, she moved through the house like a ghost, her presence marked only by the faint scent of something floral that lingered in the hallway. He noticed other things, new clothes, not the bright sundresses of summer, but blouses with crisp collars, skirts that hung just so. Her hair, usually a familiar wave, was often styled, more deliberate. There was a new perfume too, something sharp and sophisticated that replaced her usual subtle lavender. And in her eyes, a sparkle sometimes, a flash of energy when she spoke of her day, a brightness that he realized with a quiet jolt was rarely directed at him anymore. It was for the world outside their front door. "Mom's been acting really weird," Sarah said one evening, picking at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. She didn't look up, but her voice was tight. "She's always on the phone and then she gets all hushed when I walk in, and she's never home." Tom, trying to read an article on judicial precedent, grunted. "She's busy, Sarah. It's her job. You know how deadlines are at a newspaper." He dismissed it, a quick practice response. Teenage angst, he told himself. A daughter's natural complaint about a busy mother. He wanted to believe it. Then the credit card statement arrived, tucked between utility bills and a flyer for a discount carpet cleaning service. It felt heavy in his hand. He smoothed it open, his thumb tracing the familiar columns of numbers. Most of the charges were routine, groceries, gas, a new garden hose. But then he saw them. 2 charges from Bella Chic Boutique in Springfield, an hour's drive away. And beneath them, a line for the Grand Hotel Peoria. Not a grand hotel in their town, but Peoria, 2 hours east. The numbers were significant. Too significant for work expenses. He laid the statement on the kitchen table after dinner. Carol was drying a plate, humming. "This came today," he said, his voice level, trying to keep any accusation out of it. He slid the paper towards her. She glanced at it, her humming stopping. "Oh, that," she said, her tone light, dismissive. "Work expenses, a new wardrobe for some big meeting, a few pieces I needed for an interview. And the hotel was a girls' night out, remember? Beth and I, a little getaway." He remembered no such getaway with Beth Peterson, Carol's estranged sister, but he let it slide. The vagueness was a shield, deflective and impenetrable. He swallowed his questions. A few nights later, he walked into the living room intending to ask Carol a question about the next day's schedule. He heard her voice, low and urgent, from the kitchen. "No, you can't call me here. Not now." She turned, her face paling when she saw him. Her hand, already moving, snatched the phone from her ear, hitting the end call button with a speed that startled him. "Just checking on something for work," she said, her smile too wide, too quick. The air in the house thickened with unspoken questions, like humidity before a summer storm, pressing down on him. One Saturday morning, he was looking for an old textbook in Carol's gym bag, which usually sat by the back door. He remembered she'd mentioned a paper she'd found useful. His hand rummaged through the clutter, a water bottle, a used towel, a crumpled receipt from a coffee shop, and then his fingers closed around something hard, plastic. He pulled it out. A hotel key card. Not a Hilton, not a Marriott. This one had a small, stylized logo he didn't recognize, and beneath it a name. The Riverside Inn, Davenport. Davenport, 3 hours west. Not their town, not Springfield, not Peoria. A cold dread settled deep in his bones, much like the first bite of a Midwestern winter evening. It wasn't a shock, not entirely, but a chilling confirmation of a whisper he'd been trying to ignore. He thought of calling Beth Peterson, Carol's sister. Beth had always been the practical one, the one who saw things clearly. She might offer a perspective, an outside view. But their estrangement, old and calcified, felt like a barrier he couldn't breach. Not for this. He put the key card back, deep in the bag, trying to make it look untouched. He started watching Carol. Not with anger, not yet, but with a quiet, almost clinical observation. Her comings and goings, the way she answered the phone, the casual phrases she used. He charted her movements, a silent internal ledger. His students' classroom discussions on morality and justice, on the choices people made when the law failed them, now took on a stark, personal relevance. He found himself listening to their debates with a new kind of intensity, searching for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to find. "Mom yelled at me last night," Sarah said one afternoon, her voice small. They were in the car on the way to the library. "I just asked where she was going and she snapped at me, said I was being too intrusive." Tom glanced at his daughter, her face tight, a mirror of his own growing unease. He felt the walls closing in, a quiet desperation building. He was on the cusp of understanding, and the edge of that understanding felt sharp. Carol's second overnight trip, a vague mention of a conference out of town, escalated Tom's suspicions from a dull ache to a sharp, constant throb. He watched her pack a small overnight bag, her movements efficient and unburdened. The way she kissed him goodbye, a light brush against his cheek, felt like a performance. She was gone by 8 in the morning, leaving a silence that felt heavier than usual. That evening, after Sarah had gone to bed, the house grew still. Tom found himself drawn to Carol's purse, sitting on the kitchen counter. His hands trembled slightly as he unzipped it, a motion that felt both illicit and inevitable. He found her phone. A violation, he knew, a trespass into a private space, but the justifications piled up in his mind. Desperation, the need for clarity, the quiet terror of the unknown. He unlocked it, her simple 4-digit code, a number he knew from years of shared accounts and mutual trust. He scrolled through the recent calls, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Then he opened her messages. His breath caught in his throat. A series of texts, not from Beth, not from a colleague. The contact name was simply Mark. The words were intimate, undeniable. "Miss you already. Can't wait for next time. Thinking of you, wish you were here. Our secret, just ours. Late night rendezvous, stolen moments. The quiet language of an affair." He scrolled further back, the history unfolding like a cruel ledger. Dates, times, fragments of conversations about dinner, about hotel rooms, about whispered promises. The name Mark meant nothing to him. No familiar face from the university, no distant cousin. Just a name attached to words that tore through him with a visceral force. It was like being punched in the gut, the kind of blow that leaves you winded, unable to speak. The Midwestern stoicism he usually relied on failing him completely. The world narrowed to the small screen in his hand, the blue and gray bubbles of conversation a sickening dance. He spent a sleepless night. He sat in his armchair, the cold coffee in his mug long forgotten. Fragments of memory, innocuous at the time, now clicked into place, forming a coherent, horrifying picture. The vague explanations, the changed schedule, The new clothes, the distant hotel keycard, each piece a thread, now woven into a tapestry of deceit. He replayed conversations, searching for inflection, for hesitation, for the subtle tells he had overlooked. He recognized past lies, the ones he had dismissed as trivial, now festering wounds. The betrayal felt less like a sudden act and more like a slow, deliberate construction, built brick by brick over months, perhaps even years. The next morning, his face felt stiff, his eyes gritty. He brewed coffee, the smell momentarily familiar, grounding. Sarah came down, her hair a mess, her usual sleepy complaints. He feigned normalcy, his voice a little too bright, his smile a little too fixed. He asked about her plans for the day, about her book for her summer reading, trying to keep his hands from shaking as he poured cereal. "So Kevin, huh?" he said, trying for casual, as they drove Sarah to the campus bookstore. "How's that going?" Sarah shrugged. "He's fine, Dad. He's nice. We study sometimes." Her tone was guarded, as if she sensed his deeper intent. He wanted to connect with her, to remind himself of the simple, honest bonds that still existed, even as his own world fractured. He wanted to warn her, without knowing what to say, about the complexities of trust, the fragile nature of intimacy. He just wanted to hear her voice, clear and unburdened. He began planning the confrontation. The words formed in his head, sharp and precise, each one tasting like ash. He imagined Carol's face, her likely denial, her eventual concession. There would be no easy way, no gentle path. He felt a strange, detached curiosity about Mark. What did he look like? What did he offer that Tom didn't? He was a phantom, yet he had infiltrated every corner of Tom's life, altering its very fabric. He thought about fidelity, the unwritten contract, the fragile trust that held a family together, that made a house a home. It wasn't just about sex, he realized. It was about the shared narrative, the assumption of partnership, the quiet belief in a singular, unbreakable bond. Without it, everything dissolved. Carol returned later that afternoon, her car pulling into the driveway with a familiar hum. She walked through the front door, humming a cheerful pop tune, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift that had occurred in her absence. She tossed her keys on the hall table, her purse beside them. He watched her, noting the subtle changes he hadn't fully articulated before, the ease in her step, the almost imperceptible glow, the quiet confidence of a woman desired by someone else, a secret spring in her walk. He waited until she was in the shower, the sound of the water a thin curtain. He retrieved his phone, photographing the damning text messages, making sure the dates and times were clear. Then he put her phone back, exactly where he'd found it, the evidence hidden away. He knew the confrontation would irrevocably alter their lives, reshape their future in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The house felt heavy, burdened by the unspoken betrayal, waiting for the truth to break free, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long purple shadows through the living room windows. Tom found Carol there, flipping through a magazine, the quiet hum of the air conditioner the only sound. He chose the living room for a reason. It felt like neutral ground, a stage set for a battle he never wanted to fight. He sat on the opposite sofa, his hands clasped, the photographs of the text messages on his phone, the hopeful key card heavy in his pocket. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady, almost flat, betraying none of the tremor in his gut. Carol looked up, a faint frown creasing her brow. "Oh, what about?" He took a breath. "The Riverside Inn, Davenport, and your friend Mark." He laid out the evidence, the small plastic key card, then his phone with the damning photographs. He slid the phone across the coffee table. Her initial reaction was a stark, disbelieving shock, her eyes wide, her jaw slack. Then it morphed into a furious denial, her face flushing. "You've been spying on me? How could you, Tom? That's an invasion." Her voice rose, sharp with indignation. She tried to snatch the phone, but he gently pushed it back towards her. He presented more details, dates, specific phrases he'd memorized from the messages, each one a nail in the coffin. "Miss you already. Can't wait for next time." That was 2 weeks ago. And the charges at the Grand Hotel, Peoria when you said you were with Beth. Beth never went to Peoria. And the clothes from Bella Schick in Springfield? Not for work, were they? He left no room for doubt. His voice remained even, an almost clinical precision that felt alien to him. Her composure shattered. The anger drained from her face, replaced by a pale, drawn look. Tears welled in her eyes, then streamed down her cheeks, leaving wet tracks. She confessed, her voice thick with doves, offering a tangled mess of justifications. Pleas for understanding. I'm sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry. It happened. Who is he? Tom's voice was a low growl, brutal in its directness. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Carol choked back a sob. Mark Johnson. He's an editor. At the paper. He understood me. The raw, agonizing conversation spiraled. Accusations flew, words laced with years of unspoken grievances, of perceived slights, of neglected needs. You were never here, Tom. Always in your books, always at the university. I felt invisible. Her words, though painful, still didn't excuse the betrayal. He rebutted, his own hurts rising to the surface. Invisible. I paid for everything, Carol. I built this life. I tried to reach out to your parents, remember? You were the one who always shut me out. She admitted to feeling neglected, overlooked. My youth is fading, Tom. I wanted someone to see me, to make me feel alive again. The words hung in the air, hollow and pathetic. Tom felt a profound sense of loss, watching his marriage unravel before his eyes, like old rope, strand by painstaking strand. It wasn't a quick snap, but a slow, agonizing tear. Get out, he said, the words surprising him with their force, but he couldn't take them back. I can't look at you right now, just leave. He couldn't bear her presence, the weight of her betrayal too heavy, too suffocating. A faint sound from the hallway. Sarah, drawn by the raised voices, stood there, a small, ghost-like figure in her pajamas, her eyes weak and fearful. She caught fragments of the devastating truth. Mark, the paper, neglect, leave. Tom felt a fresh wave of agony, seeing the horror bloom on his daughter's face. He moved instinctively, placing himself between Sarah and Carol, trying to shield her, to spare her the full horror, the sordid details. But the damage was done. The look on Sarah's face told him everything. Carol, still weeping, understood. She nodded, her shoulders shaking. She stumbled to the bedroom, and Tom heard the rustle of clothes, the snap of a zipper. She emerged minutes later, a small duffel bag clutched in her hand, her face blotchy, her eyes red. She glanced at Sarah, a helpless plea in her gaze. Sarah, honey, I'll explain everything later. I promise. Sarah didn't respond, just stared at her mother with a chilling, silent judgment. The front door clicked shut, a final chilling sound that echoed through the sudden, vast silence of the house. Tom stood there, Sarah beside him, their hands not touching, but their silence a shared weight. He watched Carol's car back out of the driveway, its tail lights disappearing into the darkening street. He then turned to Sarah, unsure of what to say, how to repair the shattering glass of their family. He found himself sitting alone in the quiet house, the echoes of their argument, of her confession, hanging in the stale air like a persistent, unwelcome odor. Sarah retreated to her room, the door clicking shut with a quiet finality that felt louder than a shout. Devastated and confused, she refused to speak to either of them. Tom heard the muffled sounds of her crying for a long time, then a silence that felt heavier. He eventually knocked, then pushed the door open a crack. She lay on her bed, face down, her shoulders shaking. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his words fumbling. He tried to explain Carol's departure, struggling to find the right words, minimizing the pain, trying to protect her from the full ugliness of it. Your mom and I, we're going through a tough time. She just needs some space to figure things out. Sarah turned her head, her face blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed and fierce. Space? That's what you call it? She cheated on you, didn't she? I heard her. Don't lie to me, Dad. I heard Mark. Her voice was raw, laced with the bitter sting of betrayal, not just from Carol, but from him too, for trying to soften the truth. What exactly did she do? And with who? Tell me everything. She demanded to know the full truth, feeling lied to and betrayed by both of them. The difficult conversations began. First was Sarah, the raw truth laid bare, imperfectly, carefully. Then with friends, colleagues, the messy reality of separation requiring explanations, carefully worded statements about taking a break or reevaluating things. Tom felt the sting of small-town gossip, the sidelong glances in the grocery store, the pity in colleagues' eyes, the whispers that followed him like a faint, unpleasant odor. He imagined the speculation, the judgment, the ways his family's private sorrow was dissected for public consumption. He started preparing for Sarah's future, a desperate grasp for normalcy. College applications, scholarships, essays about aspirations. He'd sit with her at the kitchen table, the papers spread out, trying to focus on the future, to build something new from the wreckage. He felt a quiet urgency to ensure her path remained steady, even as his own crumbled. Carol called often. The phone would ring, her name flashing on the caller ID, but Sarah would stare at it, a stubborn set to her jaw, then let it go to voicemail. I don't want to talk to her, she'd say, her voice flat, fostering a deeper resentment that hardened with each ignored call. Tom would listen to Carol's messages later, her voice tearful, pleading, asking to speak to her daughter, promising to explain. He deleted them without reply. An unexpected ally emerged in Kevin Jensen. Tom would see his car in the driveway sometimes, late afternoon. Kevin, older, steady, would sit with Sarah on the porch swing, just talking. He offered quiet support, a calm presence that Tom, in his own turmoil, couldn't always provide. Tom found himself strangely grateful despite his earlier anxieties. Kevin seemed to understand, to listen, without judgment. Tom reflected on his own past, his parents' quiet struggles. His father, a factory worker. His mother, a homemaker. No dramatic affairs, no shattering glass, just a slow, grinding erosion of joy. A quiet distance that settled between them like dust. He saw a pattern repeating itself. A legacy of unspoken burdens. A quiet despair passing down through generations. He wondered if this was simply the Midwestern way. Stoic endurance, emotional repression, until the cracks became too wide to ignore. The house, once full, now felt empty. Each room, each piece of furniture, a reminder of what was lost. The scent of Carol's perfume, long gone, lingered in his memory, a phantom presence. He walked through the quiet rooms, the silence amplifying his thoughts, his anxieties. His academic work, especially his vigilante course, became a dark mirror to his own emotions. He read accounts of men who took the law into their own hands, seeking justice when the official channels failed. He recognized the raw impulse, the desire for control when everything felt out of control. The line between justice and vengeance blurred in his mind, becoming disturbingly personal. He considered seeking legal counsel, the bureaucratic steps of divorce feeling cold and distant, a sterile process for such a visceral wound. He imagined the forms, the filings, the division of assets, all the practicalities that felt so far removed from the shattered trust and broken hearts. Sarah, meanwhile, began to act out. Her grades, usually impeccable, slipped. She stayed out later, pushed boundaries, her anger simmering beneath the surface, finding small, rebellious outlets. I'm old enough to make my own decisions, Dad, she'd snap, a familiar defiance in her voice that reminded him ironically of Carol. He tried to reach out to Beth Peterson, Carol's estranged sister, for an outside perspective, a way to understand. He found her number, dialed it, but the familiar chasm of their family's long-standing rift remained. The phone rang unanswered, the silence on the other end, a confirmation that some bridges were simply unbridgeable. He felt a deep, soul-weary exhaustion, the kind that permeated every waking moment, a weight that settled in his bones and refused to lift. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Tom learned more about Mark. A quick search of the newspaper's online masthead, followed by a few discreet inquiries, revealed a name. Mark Johnson, an associate editor, recently promoted. Younger than Tom, perhaps a few years younger than Carol, ambitious, with a photo that showed a sharp jawline and an easy, confident smile. He pictured Mark, the editor, the one who understood Carol. A week later, Tom saw him. He was at the grocery store, pushing a cart, rounding an aisle of breakfast cereals. Mark was at the checkout, a bag of gourmet coffee and a single red rose visible in his basket. Their eyes met across the brightly lit aisle. Mark's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of recognition, then a slight hardening of his gaze. Tom held his stare, an unspoken animosity burning between them, a silent challenge in the fluorescent light. Neither man spoke. Mark paid, took his rose, and left. Tom felt a surge of something cold and bitter, a feeling that settled in his stomach like lead. His thoughts turned increasingly to his vigilante course. He'd lecture on the unwritten codes of the Old West, the rough justice meted out in dusty towns, the personal vendettas disguised as moral imperatives. The concept of justice outside the law, once an academic curiosity, now felt disturbingly personal. He started digging into Mark's background, a quiet, almost obsessive pursuit of information. Online articles, public records, anything that would reveal the man who had infiltrated his life. It felt like assembling a dossier, a quiet, desperate act of control. Sarah's grades, once a source of quiet pride, began to slip. A D on a calculus quiz, a missed assignment in English. Her focus shattered by the family turmoil, she moved through the house with a listless energy, her usual spark dulled. He'd see her staring out the window, lost in thought, or scrolling endlessly on her phone. Carol tried to reconcile with Sarah. A strained, tearful meeting at a coffee shop in the next town, arranged by text messages Tom didn't see but knew about. Sarah returned home, her face set. She cried, Dad. Said she was sorry, but she doesn't get it. She thinks it's just about you and her. She doesn't see what she did to me. The rift, it seemed, only widened. Tom struggled with his impulse for retaliation. He pictured confronting Mark, saying cutting words, exposing him somehow. The moral weight of his academic studies, the lectures on ethical frameworks, crashed against his raw personal pain. He knew the difference between righteous anger and petty revenge, but the lines blurred when it was his life, his family, lying in shards. He recalled his own youthful defiance, the way he and Carol had defied Walter Peterson, eloping to the courthouse. He remembered Carol's desperate need for agency, to make her own choices, to chart her own path. He understood that impulse, the suffocating feeling of being controlled or unseen. He saw a mirror, a twisted reflection of their past in Carol's present actions, but it didn't lessen the sting of her betrayal. He observed Kevin Jensen with Sarah, how Kevin listened, his head slightly tilted, his expression serious. Kevin seemed to genuinely care, offering a stability that Sarah desperately needed. Tom felt a new warmth and respect for the young man, a quiet gratitude that surprised him. Kevin was a good presence in Sarah's life, a calm port in the storm. The financial strain of the separation began to show. Legal fees, separate living expenses, the cost of maintaining two households. He found himself scrutinizing receipts, tightening budgets, an extra layer of burden that pressed down on him. The ease of their shared life, the unspoken assumption of joint resources, was gone, replaced by careful calculations and a constant awareness of dwindling funds. Tom realized his own part in the marriage's decay, the unspoken resentments he harbored. His quiet withdrawal, his focus on work, the ways he had perhaps stopped truly seeing Carol, assuming she would always be there, unchanging. He had, in his own way, contributed to the distance. This acknowledgement didn't erase her actions, but it softened the edges of his pure victimhood. He had a vivid dream one night. Walter Peterson, Carol's estranged father, stood in their living room, not speaking, just watching. His gaze, cold and unwavering, held no anger, no pity, only silent judgment, a confirmation of the consequences that ripple through generations. Tom woke up with a start, the weight of the dream pressing down on him. He tried to distract himself with work, spending more hours in his office, lost in historical texts. But the story of his own betrayal bled into every lecture. He spoke of justice, and he thought of Mark. He spoke of consequence, and he thought of Carol. He spoke of forgiveness, and the word felt hollow on his tongue. "I'm tired of all of this, Dad," Sarah burst out one evening, slamming her book down on the table. Her voice was raw, honest, tinged with a weariness beyond her years. "You two ruined everything. Why couldn't you just figure it out?" The outburst stung Tom, a direct hit that pierced through his own self-pity. He acknowledged the irreversible damage. The pay the price aspect of his vigilante course, the moral accounting, now moved beyond just Carol, encompassing all of them. The price wasn't hers alone to pay. The desire for direct confrontation with Mark had gnawed at Tom, a persistent, ugly itch. But the image of Mark's face at the grocery store, that slight hardening of his gaze, had shifted something. Directness felt too raw, too undignified. Tom chose a more subtle path, a slow burn instead of an explosion. He'd pieced together enough from his quiet digging to know Mark had some professional vulnerabilities. A few instances of plagiarism, minor at the time, overlooked due to his rapid ascent, but still unethical. A tendency to cut corners on fact-checking when under pressure. Tom, through an anonymous email account, sent a carefully worded tip to a rival newspaper, attaching a few articles with suspect citations. He provided enough breadcrumbs to spark an investigation, then erased his digital tracks. The ripple effect began subtly. Whispers at the paper, a quiet internal review. Then Mark faced professional repercussions. A demotion, a public reprimand, some of his bylines stripped. His easy, confident smile, Tom imagined, would be harder to maintain. Carol, caught in the fallout, was furious. She knew it had to be Tom. He was the only one who would have known. She confronted him outside the campus library, where he was walking to his office. Her voice was sharp, cutting, oblivious to the students milling nearby. "You did this, didn't you? You ruined his career. How could you be so petty?" It was a bitter public argument, her face flushed with rage, his own a mask of calm, though his stomach churned. Sarah, walking past with Kevin on their way to the bookstore, witnessed the public display. Her gaze, wide and wounded, moved from her mother's angry face to Tom's impassive one, then quickly looked away, pulling Kevin along. The scene, raw and undignified, further cemented her distrust and pain, another ugly crack in the fragile foundation of their family. The divorce proceedings began. Cold and clinical, they turned their life into a ledger of assets and liabilities. The house, the cars, the savings, divided into neat columns. The law offices smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Lawyers spoke in measured tones, discussing custody agreements and alimony, reducing their 20-year marriage to a series of calculations. Tom felt a fleeting satisfaction when he heard the full extent of Mark's professional woes, a brief, bitter taste of vindication. But it was quickly replaced by a profound emptiness. Revenge, he realized, didn't heal. It didn't restore what was lost. It merely left a different kind of void. He found himself reflecting on his youthful idealism, the bright-eyed TA who believed in truth and justice, contrasting it with his current disillusionment. The world he understood now was not as neat as a history textbook. Its moral compass swung wildly, often pointing to self-interest and betrayal. Sarah, meanwhile, was making plans. Not just college applications, but applications to universities outside the state, far from their small Midwestern town. "I want to go somewhere new, Dad," she said, her voice firm. "Somewhere where nobody knows anything." A desire to leave, to escape the messy reality, to start fresh. Then a surprising call. Walter Peterson, Carol's father. He'd heard of the divorce through the grapevine, a local attorney who knew both families. Tom, his voice was gruff, distant, yet devoid of the usual coldness. "Heard things aren't going well with Carol. Figured I should call." Tom met with Walter at a diner on the edge of town, a neutral place. It was a strained but civil conversation, punctuated by the clatter of plates and the hiss of the coffee machine right by. Walter asked about Sarah, about Tom's work. They spoke, obliquely, about Carol, her stubborn streak, her defiance, her youthful desire to escape his control. Walter surprisingly expressed regret for his past rigidity. "Maybe I pushed her too hard," he mumbled, stirring his coffee. A hint of vulnerability, a crack in his stone facade. Soon after, Beth Peterson, Carol's sister, also reached out. A card arrived in the mail, simple, offering belated sisterly support to Tom and Sarah. A separate email followed, asking if Sarah would like to visit for a weekend. The family chasm, once wide and unbridgeable, might slowly begin to mend. Tom understood that even in ruin, new connections could form, fragile ones, tentative bridges built across the wreckage of old loyalties. He looked at the card, then at Sarah's college applications. Life, it seemed, found a way to reconfigure itself, even after the most devastating blows. The divorce was finalized on a cool Tuesday morning, a quiet, somber affair in a small, sterile courtroom. A judge, his face impassive, signed the papers. There were no shouts, no tears from Carol, just a quiet resignation from both of them. Tom felt a sense of finality, not relief, but a closing of a chapter, a quiet thud. The old life, formally and legally, was over. Carol left town a few weeks later. She found a job at a small paper in a different state, seeking a fresh start elsewhere, away from the gossip and the judgment that lingered like humidity in their small community. She sent Sarah a brief text message, a simple goodbye, which Sarah read and put her phone down without a reply. Sarah, true to her word, had chosen a distant university, an out-of-state scholarship, a clear path toward escape. She worked diligently on her applications, her focus now sharp, channeled into a future far from the wreckage of her parents' marriage. She was eager to leave, to shed the skin of this town, this life. Tom and Sarah began to rebuild their relationship. A fragile piece it was, based on shared loss and a quiet understanding. They spent evenings talking, not about Carol, but about Sarah's college plans, about Tom's lectures, about the mundane details of their new, quieter life. He listened more, offered fewer easy answers. The silences between them were no longer heavy with unspoken accusation, but with a comfortable, if somewhat melancholy, acceptance. He realized his definition of vigilante justice had broadened. It wasn't just about dramatic confrontations or public shaming. It encompassed quieter consequences, the subtle unraveling of a reputation, the slow, unseen erosion of trust. His actions against Mark, he now saw, were a part of that, a private accounting that had unforeseen ripples. Kevin Jensen remained a steady presence for Sarah. He helped her with her essays, drove her to campus for orientation visits, listened to her anxieties. He offered her stability amidst the chaos, a quiet anchor in her turbulent teenage years. Tom respected him for it, a silent appreciation for the young man who had become a friend to his daughter when she needed one most. Tom grappled with the morality of his actions against Mark. Was it truly justice, or merely revenge cloaked in anonymity? He turned it over in his mind, finding no easy answer. The personal satisfaction had faded, replaced by a lingering unease, a quiet question of his own moral compromises. He continued his vigilante course, but now his lectures carried a different weight. He spoke of moral ambiguities, of the blurred lines between right and wrong, of the human impulse for redress. He used his personal experience, without naming it, to illustrate the complexities, the kadis, the unforeseen consequences of actions taken outside the established order. His students, he noticed, listened with a new intensity, a quiet conversation with Sarah one evening as they sat on the porch swing. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" he asked, the words unexpected even to him. Sarah looked out at the darkening street. "I don't know, Dad," she said, her voice soft. "Maybe someday, but I don't think I'll ever forget." It was an acknowledgement of the pain, but also a quiet looking forward, a step towards a future unburdened by past grievances. Tom started to find solace in his routines. His garden, once a chore, became a source of quiet joy. The predictable cycle of growth and decay a comfort. The predictable rhythm of academic life, the familiar faces in his classes, the quiet hum of the library, offered a grounding he hadn't realized he'd lost. He occasionally received updates on Carol through Walter or Beth. She was doing well, finding her feet in the new town, keeping to herself. Distant and detached, the updates felt like news of a stranger, a life lived far from his own. The financial burdens eased slightly. With two smaller households and Carol's new job, the strain lessened, allowing for a semblance of comfort, a stability that had been elusive for so long. He visited Sarah's old room sometimes after she left for college. The bed neatly made, the desk cleared, a faint scent of her old perfume still lingering. He felt a mixture of nostalgia for the little girl she was and a powerful hope for the woman she was becoming. Tom understood that the family unit, though fractured, could still provide support in new ways. Walter's occasional calls, Beth's messages to Sarah, not a replacement for what was lost, but new threads woven into the fabric of their lives. He accepted the quiet solitude, finding a different kind of strength in it, a calm resilience he hadn't known he possessed. Sarah's high school graduation was a bittersweet ceremony held on the football field under a clear summer sky. Carol was absent, a space left empty in the row where parents usually sat. But Walter and Beth Peterson were there, quiet and formal in their Sunday best, sitting with Tom, a silent acknowledgement of a new fragile bond. Tom watched Sarah cross the stage, her cap slightly askew, a determined look on her face. He felt a swell of pride, sharp and clean, mixed with a lingering sadness for the fractured family unit that stood witness. He watched her move towards her independence, a trajectory that had been set long ago. A week later, he helped Sarah pack her car. The trunk was full of boxes, the back seat piled with clothes and a guitar. The drive to her distant state university was long, marked by quiet conversation and the subtle understanding that this was a true new beginning for her. He hugged her goodbye in front of her dorm, the embrace tight, full of unspoken hopes and fears. Then he turned the car around, heading back towards the empty house. He returned to a truly empty house. The silence amplified the weight of his thoughts, the echoes of a life once shared now muted to a faint whisper. He considered his future, the possibility of new relationships perhaps. He was still relatively young, but he felt no urgency, no immediate desire to fill the void. The solitude for now was a space for reflection, for quiet healing. A few months after Sarah left, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter. The return address was from Carol's new town. Tom opened it carefully. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness or a desperate attempt at reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement of her mistakes, a quiet reflection on her regrets, and a sincere wish for his and Sarah's happiness. She spoke of her own journey, her new basitam, the slow process of building a life from scratch. It was a gesture of closure, not renewal. Tom reflected on the meaning of pay the price. He realized it wasn't just Carol who had paid. He had paid with years of quiet anger, with the shattering of his trust, with the loss of a shared future. Sarah had paid with her innocence, with the burden of adult problems too soon. Everyone, he understood, bore some cost. He continued his vigilante course, but his lectures were richer, imbued with new layers of understanding. He spoke of human actions, not as simple right or wrong, but as complex responses to internal and external pressures. The moral ambiguities, the gray areas, were no longer just academic concepts. They were etched into the landscape of his own life. He found small moments of contentment, a quiet evening with a book in his armchair, the lamp casting a warm glow. A walk along the river, the crisp Midwestern air invigorating his lungs. The predictable change of seasons, the enduring beauty of the natural world, offered a quiet solace. He cultivated his garden with a renewed dedication. The rich earth, the slow growth of the vegetables and flowers, was a metaphor for enduring life, even after hardship. New growth always followed decay, a constant, reliable rhythm. Then, a call from Sarah. Her voice, bright and full of life, spoke of new friends, challenging classes, the vibrant energy of her new environment. She was happy, thriving, a beacon of hope, confirming that life did indeed go on, and that good things could still bloom. The memory of Carol, sharp at first, began to fade. It became a distant echo rather than a constant ache. The anger receded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Tom acknowledged the moral complexities of life, the gray areas where right and wrong blurred into a spectrum of human choices and consequences. He understood that betrayal left scars, deep and lasting, but life, like the seasons, continued to turn. He often found himself gazing out at the vast Midwestern sky, the horizon stretching endlessly. He was a solitary figure perhaps, but no longer truly alone. The weight had lifted. The future was uncertain, and as all futures are, but it was also open, a clear, wide horizon waiting to be faced. The divorce was finalized on a cool Tuesday morning, a quiet, somber affair in a small, sterile courtroom. A judge, his face impassive, signed the papers. There were no shouts, no tears from Carol, just a quiet resignation from both of them. Tom felt a sense of finality, not relief, but a closing of a chapter, a quiet thud. The old life, formally and legally, was over. Carol left town a few weeks later. She found a job at a small paper in a different state, seeking a fresh start elsewhere, away from the gossip and the judgment that lingered like humidity in their small community. She sent Sarah a brief text message, a simple goodbye, which Sarah read and put her phone down without a reply. Sarah, true to her word, had chosen a distant university, an out-of-state scholarship, a clear path toward escape. She worked diligently on her applications, her focus now sharp, channeled into a future far from the wreckage of her parents' marriage. She was eager to leave, to shed the skin of this town, this life. Tom and Sarah began to rebuild their relationship. A fragile piece it was, based on shared loss and a quiet understanding. They spent evenings talking, not about Carol, but about Sarah's college plans, about Tom's lectures, about the mundane details of their new, quieter life. He listened more, offered fewer easy answers. The silences between them were no longer heavy with unspoken accusation, but with a comfortable, if somewhat melancholy, acceptance. He realized his definition of vigilante justice had broadened. It wasn't just about dramatic confrontations or public shaming. It encompassed quieter consequences, the subtle unraveling of a reputation, the slow, unseen erosion of trust. His actions against Mark, he now saw, were a part of that, a private accounting that had unforeseen ripples. Kevin Jensen remained a steady presence for Sarah. He helped her with her essays, drove her to campus for orientation visits, listened to her anxieties. He offered her stability amidst the chaos, a quiet anchor in her turbulent teenage years. Tom respected him for it, a silent appreciation for the young man who had become a friend to his daughter when she needed one most. Tom grappled with the morality of his actions against Mark. Was it truly justice, or merely revenge cloaked in anonymity? He turned it over in his mind, finding no easy answer. The personal satisfaction had faded, replaced by a lingering unease, a quiet question of his own moral compromises. He continued his vigilante course, but his lectures were richer, imbued with new layers of understanding. He spoke of human actions, not as simple right or wrong, but as complex responses to internal and external pressures. The moral ambiguities, the gray areas, were no longer just academic concepts. They were etched into the landscape of his own life. He found small moments of contentment. A quiet evening with a book in his armchair, the lamp casting a warm glow. A walk along the river, the crisp Midwestern air invigorating his lungs. The predictable change of seasons, the enduring beauty of the natural world, offered a quiet solace. He cultivated his garden with a renewed dedication. The rich earth, the slow growth of the vegetables and flowers, was a metaphor for enduring life, even after hardship. New growth always followed decay, a constant, reliable rhythm. Then a call from Sarah. Her voice, bright and full of life, spoke of new friends, challenging classes, the vibrant energy of her new environment. She was happy, thriving, a beacon of hope, confirming that life did indeed go on, and that good things could still bloom. The memory of Carol, sharp at first, began to fade. It became a distant echo rather than a constant ache. The anger receded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Tom acknowledged the moral complexities of life, the gray areas where right and wrong blurred into a spectrum of human choices and consequences. He understood that betrayal left scars deep and lasting, but life, like the seasons, continued to turn. He often found himself gazing out at the vast Midwestern sky, the horizon stretching endlessly. He was a solitary figure, perhaps, but no longer truly alone. The weight had lifted. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but it was also open, a clear, wide horizon waiting to be faced.